At Christmas, I received a message, "Do not eat." The words felt like ice water flooding my veins. My own granddaughter had sent it. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I would share. And if for even a second this feels familiar, I only ask that you like this video and subscribe. It will help me keep opening my heart. I am 73 years old. My hands shake more than they used to, and my back aches constantly from 30 years of cleaning office buildings in Manhattan. But that Christmas morning in my small Brooklyn apartment, nothing hurt more than reading those 3 words on my phone screen. Do not eat. The turkey was golden brown, sitting in my grandmother's old roasting pan. The stuffing smelled of sage and butter. Sweet potato casserole bubbled in the oven. I had been awake since 4 in the morning, preparing this meal for my family. My daughter Lisa, my son Michael, his wife Sarah, and their teenage daughter Emma were supposed to arrive at noon. The apartment smelled like pine from the small Christmas tree I'd bought with my Social Security money. Red and gold ornaments hung from branches that touched the low ceiling. I had wrapped presents in newspapers because gift wrap was too expensive this year. Everything looked perfect, the way Christmas was supposed to look. But something was wrong. The message had come from Emma, my granddaughter, the girl I had raised half her life while her parents worked their demanding jobs in the city. The child I had walked to school every morning for 3 years. The teenager whose college fund I had secretly contributed to, taking extra shifts cleaning office bathrooms until my knees screamed, "Do not eat." I stood in my tiny kitchen, surrounded by the feast I had spent my last $100 preparing, and I trembled. Not from cold, from fear. The buzzing of my old flip phone made me jump. Lisa's name flashed on the screen. "Mom, we're not coming." Her voice was sharp, distant. "Emma is sick. We've all been throwing up since yesterday." "What?" I gripped the phone tighter. "Throwing up? From what?" "Food poisoning, Mom. From that restaurant we went to last night. Emma said you might have the same bug. That's why she texted you not to eat anything. We don't want you getting sick, too." Relief flooded through me, warm and overwhelming. My granddaughter hadn't been cruel. She had been protecting me. But the relief lasted only seconds before a new pain settled in my chest. "When will you come?" I asked, looking at the beautiful meal cooling on my counter. "We can't, Mom. Maybe next week when we're feeling better." The line went dead. I sat down at my small dining table, set for 5, and stared at the empty chairs. The silence pressed against my ears like water. Christmas music played softly from my old radio, but the joyful melodies mocked the emptiness surrounding me. This was not the first Christmas I had spent alone. It was becoming a pattern. Let me tell you about the woman I used to be. I was born in this same neighborhood in 1951, when Brooklyn was different. When families stayed together. When children took care of their parents the way their parents had taken care of them. I married Robert when I was 22. He was a construction worker with gentle hands and a laugh that filled rooms. We were poor but happy in our tiny apartment on Prospect Avenue. Lisa was born 2 years later, Michael 3 years after that. I worked part-time at a diner while Robert built skyscrapers that still stand today in Manhattan. We saved every penny. We dreamed of buying a house, maybe in Queens, with a yard where the children could play. But dreams cost money. Robert hurt his back when Lisa was 8. Workers' compensation barely covered the rent. I started cleaning offices at night after my diner shifts ended. The children would be asleep when I left, asleep when I returned at dawn. I would kiss their foreheads and collapse into bed for 3 hours before starting again. Robert never fully recovered. The injury led to surgeries, medical bills, and pills that made him distant and angry. I worked harder to compensate. Double shifts. Triple shifts. My body aged in fast forward, but I told myself it was temporary. Just until Robert got better. Just until the children finished school. Just until we caught up. Robert died when I was 55. Heart attack on a Tuesday morning. I found him in our kitchen, coffee cup broken on the floor beside his body. The funeral cost $8,000. Money I didn't have. Money my children couldn't help with because they were struggling too, starting their own careers, their own families. I took out loans to bury my husband, loans that followed me for years afterward, eating pieces of my Social Security check every month. But I never complained. Not to Lisa, not to Michael, not to anyone. Because that's what mothers do. We sacrifice. We endure. We give until there's nothing left to give. Then we find more somewhere deep inside ourselves. When Emma was born, I was 60. Lisa and her husband both worked demanding jobs in finance. They needed help with the baby. I said yes immediately. Of course I would help. I retired early, taking a reduced pension so I could care for my granddaughter full-time. Those were beautiful years. Emma's first steps were toward my outstretched arms. Her first word was Gamma. I fed her, bathed her, sang her to sleep. When she had nightmares, she crawled into bed with me. When she scraped her knees, I kissed the wounds better. When she started school, I walked her there every morning and picked her up every afternoon. Lisa and her husband appreciated my help, I thought. They would come home from work looking exhausted and relieved to find Emma happy and fed. "Thanks, Mom," Lisa would say quickly, gathering her daughter's things. "Same time tomorrow?" Always the same time tomorrow. 7 in the morning until 7 at night. 12 hours a day, 5 days a week. Sometimes weekends too when they had social obligations or business trips. I changed my entire life around their schedule. I had no social life, no hobbies, no time for myself. But I didn't mind. I was needed. I was useful. I was part of something bigger than my loneliness. The years passed quickly. Emma grew from a toddler into a child into a teenager. She became busy with school, friends, activities. She needed me less. Lisa and her husband needed me less. The daily phone calls became weekly, then monthly, then only when they needed something. "Mom, can you loan me $2,000? Lisa called one evening. "The mortgage payment is late and we're facing penalties." I gave her the money from my small emergency fund. Money I had been saving for a new winter coat. My old one had holes in the pockets and a broken zipper, but it would last another season. "I'll pay you back next month," Lisa promised. She never did. "Mom, Michael's truck broke down," Sarah called another time. "He needs $1,500 for repairs. He's been out of work for 2 weeks and we're behind on everything." I gave them that money too, from the account where I kept coins from cleaning offices. Quarters and dimes saved over years, rolled and deposited dollar by dollar. It wasn't much, but it was mine. It was my security. They never paid that back either. The requests came regularly, always urgent, always necessary. Car repairs, medical bills, utility shutoff notices, children's school expenses. I gave what I had, then I gave what I didn't have. I took loans against my small pension. I worked extra cleaning jobs even though my arthritis was getting worse. I ate less so I could give more. And slowly, without realizing it was happening, I became invisible. Phone calls were hurried, functional. "Hi, Mom. Can't talk long, but Emma needs money for her class trip." Visit requests were rare. "Sorry, Mom. We're swamped this weekend. Maybe next month?" Holiday invitations came with conditions. "You can come for Christmas dinner, but we're eating early because we have plans later." I began to notice things. How conversations stopped when I entered rooms. How my opinions were dismissed with patronizing smiles. How my stories about the past were interrupted or ignored completely. I was becoming a burden disguised as a helper. A wallet with legs. A convenient grandmother who appeared when needed and disappeared when not. But I told myself it was natural. Children grow up. They build their own lives. They get busy. It's not personal, I reasoned. It's just how families evolve. Except it felt personal. It felt like abandonment in slow motion. The Christmas when I received Emma's warning message was supposed to be different. I had planned it for weeks. spending money I shouldn't have spent. Real butter for the mashed potatoes, fresh cranberries for the sauce, a small ham in addition to the turkey because Michael had mentioned loving ham, wine for the adults, sparkling cider for Emma, homemade pies using my mother's recipe. I wanted to remind them what home felt like, what family meant, what love tasted like when it was prepared with intention and served with gratitude. But they never came. I sat at my table until the food grew cold. I wrapped everything carefully and put it in the refrigerator, thinking maybe they would visit the next day, or the day after. Maybe when they felt better, they would want to share the meal I had prepared with such hope. They never did. Days passed. The turkey dried out. The sides spoiled. I threw it all away, bag by bag, feeling like I was disposal of more than food. I was throwing away the last remnants of my delusions about my place in this family. 2 weeks after Christmas, I got another call from Lisa. "Mom, we need to talk." Her voice was different, colder, more formal. "About what, sweetheart?" "About your expectations, about how you've been acting lately." "Acting? I don't understand." "You've been guilt-tripping us, making us feel bad for having our own lives. Emma told me about the money you've been asking her to save for college instead of spending on normal teenage things. That's not your place, Mom." I was confused. I had never asked Emma to save money. In fact, I had been secretly contributing to her college fund, adding $20 or $30 whenever I could scrape it together. "Lisa, I never—" And the constant questions about when we're visiting, when we're calling. "It's suffocating, Mom. We all feel it." Michael agrees. Even Emma has noticed. My heart stopped. Emma had noticed. My sweet granddaughter, who used to climb into my lap to tell me about her day, thought I was suffocating. "I just miss you all," I said quietly. "I just want to spend time together." "But it's always on your terms, Mom. Always guilt and manipulation if we can't drop everything to accommodate your schedule." "My schedule?" I laughed bitterly. "Lisa, I don't have a schedule. I have nothing but time. I'm available whenever you need me, for whatever you need." "That's the problem, Mom. You've made us your whole world, and it's not healthy. For any of us." The words hit like physical blows. I had made them my whole world because they were my whole world. After Robert died, after I retired to care for Emma, after I spent decades giving everything I had to this family, what else was supposed to matter to me? "We think you should see someone," Lisa continued. "A therapist. To work through these attachment issues." Attachment issues. As if loving my family too much was a mental illness. "We also think it might be better if we take a break. Some space. Just for a while, until you can get some perspective." "A break?" My voice cracked. "From what?" "From us. From the family dynamics that aren't working anymore." The conversation ended shortly after. I sat holding the phone long after she hung up, trying to process what had just happened. My daughter had just fired me from being her mother. She had diagnosed me with loving too much and prescribed isolation as the cure. That night, I couldn't sleep. I walked through my small apartment, looking at photographs spanning decades. Lisa as a baby, sleeping on my chest. Michael taking his first steps toward the camera. Emma blowing out birthday candles while I held her steady on my lap. Wedding photos, graduation photos, Christmas mornings filled with wrapping paper and laughter. When had it all gone wrong? When had love become suffocation? When had generosity become manipulation? When had being a devoted mother and grandmother become evidence of mental illness? I made coffee at 3 a.m. and sat at my kitchen table, watching traffic lights change colors through my window. Red, yellow, green. Stop, caution, go. But which signal was meant for me? The break Lisa had requested stretched into weeks, then months. No calls, no visits, no messages except for brief responses when I texted first. Busy. Can't talk now. Maybe later. My birthday came and went without acknowledgement. Mother's Day was silent. Easter passed unmarked. I had become a ghost in my own family's life. But the strangest thing was how quickly they seemed to forget I existed at all. Through mutual acquaintances, I heard about Emma's spring break trip to Florida, about Michael's promotion at work, about Lisa's new car. Life was continuing without me, apparently seamlessly. Had I really been such a burden that my absence was a relief? I started paying attention to other things I had missed. How conversations at family gatherings had often stopped when I approached. How my suggestions were dismissed before I finished making them. How my stories were met with polite but impatient smiles. How I was frequently excluded from photographs, standing behind the camera instead of in front of it. Looking back with new eyes, I saw patterns I had ignored or excused. The subtle eye rolls when I offered opinions. The way my gifts were received with lukewarm gratitude but never mentioned again. How my requests for help or company were always met with excuses, but their requests for money were never refused. I had been useful, not loved, convenient, not cherished, available, not valued. The realization was devastating and liberating simultaneously. Devastating because it meant decades of my life had been built on illusions. Liberating because it meant I could stop performing for an audience that had never been watching with affection anyway. I started making changes. Small ones at first. I went to the library and checked out books I wanted to read, not just cookbooks and childcare guides. I discovered a love for mystery novels I had forgotten I possessed. I walked through Prospect Park without purpose, just for the pleasure of movement and fresh air. I sat on benches and watched other people live their lives without worrying about when I needed to be somewhere else. I bought myself a new coat, a beautiful red wool coat that fit properly and made me feel elegant. It cost more than I usually spent on myself in 3 months, but I wore it proudly. I joined a senior center's book club and discovered there were other women my age who had similar stories. Women who had given everything to children who had grown distant. Women who had sacrificed their identities for families who had grown comfortable taking that sacrifice for granted. We weren't crazy. We weren't suffering from attachment disorders. We were casualties of a culture that expects mothers to give endlessly and then blames them when that giving becomes their primary source of identity and purpose. The book club became a lifeline. Every Tuesday evening, 8 women gathered in the community center to discuss novels, but we always ended up discussing our lives, our disappointments, our fears, our growing understanding that we had been complicit in our own invisibility. Margaret had been supporting her 40-year-old son financially for 2 decades. He had never held a steady job, but always had elaborate explanations for why this time would be different. She was considering bankruptcy to cover his latest business venture. Dorothy's daughter had moved across the country after college and called only when she needed something. Dorothy had spent thousands on plane tickets to visit grandchildren who barely knew her, for holidays where she felt like an unwelcome guest in her own daughter's home. Patricia had moved in with her son after her husband's death, giving him power of attorney over her finances. He had sold her house without consulting her and was now threatening to put her in a nursing home when she complained about losing her independence. We were 8 women who had confused love with service, family with obligation. We had made ourselves indispensable in practical matters but somehow dispensable in emotional ones. But we were learning. Slowly, carefully, we were learning to value ourselves the way we had always valued others. I started saying no. When Michael called asking for money to fix his truck again, I said, "I'm sorry, but I can't help this time." "But Mom, I'll lose my job without transportation." "I understand that's difficult, but I've already helped with this expense several times. You'll need to find another solution." I can't believe how selfish you've become. Selfish, the word that every woman my age fears most. The accusation that cuts deepest because we've been conditioned to believe our worth depends entirely on our willingness to sacrifice for others. But I didn't apologize. I didn't change my mind. I said, "I love you, Michael, but I won't be helping financially anymore." And I hung up. The silence that followed was terrifying and exhilarating. For the first time in decades, I had prioritized my own needs over someone else's wants. The world hadn't ended. I hadn't stopped loving my son. I had simply stopped enabling his irresponsibility. Similar conversations followed with Lisa. No, I couldn't babysit on short notice anymore because I had made other plans. No, I couldn't loan money for vacation expenses. No, I wouldn't change my schedule to accommodate last-minute requests. Each no felt like rebellion. Each boundary felt like freedom. But freedom comes with costs. The calls became less frequent. The requests stopped coming. The family messages group chat continued without me, or so I assumed since I was no longer included. I spent my 74th birthday alone, but by choice this time. I took myself to dinner at a nice restaurant in Manhattan, dressed in my red coat and good jewelry I had been saving for special occasions. I ordered wine with my meal and dessert afterward. I tipped generously and smiled at strangers. It was the best birthday I had experienced in years. Summer arrived, and with it came unexpected contact from Emma. A text message late one evening. "Grandma, can we talk?" My heart leaped. I called immediately. "Hi, Gamma." The old nickname brought tears to my eyes. "Hello, sweetheart. How are you?" "I'm okay. I'm sorry it's been so long since we talked. Mom said you were going through some stuff and needed space." Some stuff. Space. The story had been rewritten to make my boundaries sound like mental health issues, and my absence sound like my choice entirely. "I miss you," Emma said quietly. "I miss our talks. I miss spending time with you. I miss you too, baby, more than you know. Can I come visit you sometime? Just me?" "Of course. Anytime you want." The following Saturday, Emma arrived at my apartment carrying a small overnight bag. She was 18 now, preparing for college in the fall. Beautiful and confident, but there was sadness in her eyes I hadn't noticed before. We made dinner together, something simple. We talked about her classes, her friends, her plans for the future. But eventually, the conversation turned to family. "Grandma, why did you stop coming to things? Mom says you didn't want to anymore, but that doesn't sound like you." I chose my words carefully. I think there were some misunderstandings about expectations, about boundaries. "Were you really asking me to save my money instead of spending it on stuff I wanted?" "No, sweetheart. I never said that. In fact, I've been contributing to your college fund for years, small amounts, but consistently." Emma's face changed. "You have? But Mom said—" "What did Mom say?" "That you were trying to control how I spent my allowance, that you were making me feel guilty for normal teenager purchases." Another piece of the puzzle fell into place. My generosity had been reframed as manipulation. My care had been redesigned as control. The story of our relationship had been edited to cast me as the villain and them as victims of my excessive love. "Emma, I want you to know something important. Nothing I ever did for this family was done with strings attached. When I gave money, it was given freely. When I provided care, it was offered with love. When I made sacrifices, they were made willingly. But somewhere along the way, my love was interpreted as obligation, and my generosity was seen as manipulation." Tears filled her eyes. "I never thought you were manipulative, Grandma. I always felt loved when I was with you. Safe. Important. You were important. You are important. You always will be." That night, Emma slept in my bed like she used to when she was small. We stayed awake talking until nearly dawn, and I realized how much I had missed not just her presence, but her perspective. She saw me differently than her parents did. She remembered the grandmother who had sung lullabies and kissed scraped knees, not the burden her parents had convinced themselves I had become. When she left the next morning, something had shifted between us. A recognition, an understanding, a connection that existed independent of her parents' interpretation of my place in the family. But Emma was leaving for college soon. She would build her own life, make her own choices. I couldn't expect her to bridge the gap between me and her parents. That wasn't her responsibility. I had to decide who I wanted to be in the final chapters of my life. Did I want to keep fighting for acceptance from people who seemed determined to misunderstand me? Or did I want to build a life that had meaning and purpose beyond their approval? The answer became clear during a conversation with Margaret from book club. Her son had called asking for money again, but this time she had said no so firmly that he had exploded in anger. He told me I was a terrible mother, she shared with our group. He said I had never been there for him when he needed me most. We all recognized the manipulation immediately, the rewriting of history, the weaponization of maternal guilt. You know what I realized? Margaret continued. He wasn't angry about my current refusal to help. He was angry about the possibility that I might develop enough self-respect to stop helping altogether. He wasn't afraid of losing my support for this crisis. He was afraid of losing his access to unlimited support for all future crises. That's when it clicked for me. My children weren't disappointed in my recent behavior because it hurt them. They were disappointed because it suggested I might be developing boundaries that would limit their future access to my resources. They had grown comfortable with a version of me that existed primarily to serve their needs. Any deviation from that role felt like betrayal to them because it threatened the dynamic they had come to depend on. But that dynamic had been slowly destroying me. I had become so focused on being needed that I had stopped being myself. I had confused my value as a person with my utility as a resource. The revelation was painful but necessary. I grieved for the relationships I thought I had been building all these years. I mourned the family dynamic I had imagined existed. I allowed myself to feel the full weight of disappointment and disillusion, but I also felt something else: relief. The pressure to constantly prove my worth through service was gone. The anxiety about whether I was giving enough, doing enough, being enough, it all evaporated when I realized I had been playing a game where the rules were designed to ensure I could never win. I started making bigger changes. I sold some jewelry Robert had given me and used the money to take a painting class. I had always been artistic, but had given up creative pursuits when the children were young and never returned to them. My hands, stiff with arthritis but steady with purpose, remembered how to hold a brush. My eyes, clouded with age but clear with intention, remembered how to see color and light and shadow. My heart, wounded but healing, remembered what it felt like to create something beautiful, just for the joy of creating. The painting instructor was a woman named Rosa, probably in her 60s, who had returned to art after her own children moved away. She understood the particular restlessness of women our age, the need to reclaim parts of ourselves that had been set aside during decades of caretaking. "You have good instincts," she told me after my third class. "You're not painting what you think you should paint. You're painting what you feel." What I felt, apparently, was bold and vibrant. My canvases exploded with colors I had never worn, never decorated with, never imagined myself drawn to. Deep purples and bright oranges and shocking pinks. I was painting the woman I had been before I learned to make myself small and accommodating and invisible. The community center where I took art classes also offered other activities: line dancing on Thursday evenings, chair yoga on Monday mornings, a walking group that met in Prospect Park every Wednesday. I started attending everything, hungry for connection and activity after years of isolation. I made friends. Real friends, not just acquaintances or family members who tolerated my presence. Women and men who were building lives worth living in their retirement years. People who were dealing with distant children and financial concerns and health problems, but who were also traveling and learning new skills and dating and laughing. I discovered I was funny. Not just grandmother funny, telling stories about cute things children had done. Actually funny, with timing and wit and observations about life that made people laugh until they snorted. I had forgotten I possessed this quality. had set it aside somewhere during the serious business of single motherhood and financial struggle and family caretaking. I started wearing jewelry again, red lipstick, scarves that served no practical purpose but made me feel elegant. I bought clothes that fit properly rather than buying whatever was cheapest or most practical. I got my hair cut in a becoming style rather than just asking for a trim every 6 months. Looking in the mirror one morning, I barely recognized the woman staring back at me. Not because I looked younger, I didn't, but because I looked alive in a way I hadn't in years. There was light in my eyes, purpose in my posture, joy in my expression. I was becoming someone I actually liked spending time with. The changes were noticed. Emma commented during one of our regular phone calls that I sounded different. Happier, she said. More like the grandmother she remembered from her childhood. "Are you dating anyone, Grandma?" she asked teasingly. The question surprised me. Dating hadn't occurred to me as a possibility. I was 74 years old, widowed for nearly 20 years, and had spent so long thinking of myself as a caregiver that I had forgotten I might also be a woman worthy of romance. "Would that be okay with you if I were?" "Of course. I want you to be happy." Her easy acceptance gave me permission to consider possibilities I had dismissed as ridiculous. Was I too old for companionship? Too set in my ways for partnership? Too damaged from family disappointment for new love? The answer, I decided, was no to all of the above. I didn't start actively looking for romance, but I stopped automatically declining when opportunities for socialness presented themselves. When Harold from my walking group asked if I wanted to get coffee after our Wednesday workout, I said yes. When the widower from book club wondered if I might like to attend a lecture at the Brooklyn Museum together, I accepted. These weren't dates in any traditional sense, but they were connections based on mutual interest and respect, rather than family obligation or financial need. It was refreshing to spend time with people who enjoyed my company without expecting anything in return. Harold was particularly good company. 78 years old, retired from teaching high school history, still sharp and curious about the world. His wife had died 5 years earlier from cancer, and his 2 sons lived in California, too busy with their own families to visit often. He understood the particular loneliness of aging parents whose children had moved on. But unlike me, Harold had made peace with that reality early. He had never expected his sons to organize their lives around his needs. He had never confused love with constant contact or care with constant availability. He had maintained his identity as a complete person rather than defining himself solely through his parental role. "You raised them to be independent," he told me one afternoon as we walked through the botanical garden. "Independence means they get to choose how much contact they want with you. It's not personal, it's just human." "But what if they make the wrong choices?" I asked. "What if they prioritize things that don't matter over relationships that do?" "Then they'll learn from those mistakes or they won't, but either way, it's not your job to fix their priorities. Your job is to live your own life fully so that when they do want a relationship with you, you have something interesting to offer." It was a radical concept for someone like me, who had spent decades believing my worth depended on my willingness to fix everyone else's problems. The idea that I should focus on developing myself rather than improving them felt selfish at first. But gradually, it started to feel like wisdom. I continued painting, and my skills improved dramatically. My apartment walls filled with my own artwork. Visitors commented on the beauty and vibrancy of my pieces. Several people asked if I sold my work. Selling my art hadn't occurred to me, but why not? I researched local galleries and coffee shops that featured local artists. I learned about art fairs and community exhibits. I discovered there was a market for original paintings by senior artists, especially those with interesting life stories. My first sale was a small landscape I had painted of Prospect Park in autumn. $50 to a young couple who said it reminded them of their first date. I was so excited I called Emma immediately. "Grandma, that's amazing! You're a professional artist now." Professional artist. I rolled the words around in my mind like candy. At 74, I had gained a new identity. Not just mother, grandmother, caretaker, but artist, creator, professional. I started painting more seriously, treating it like the business it was becoming. I set up a small studio space in my bedroom, invested in better supplies, and began working on a series of pieces for a group show at the community center. The theme was Unexpected Journeys, and I painted mine, a woman walking away from a house full of people who weren't paying attention to her departure. In the background, the house was warm and welcoming, but the woman was walking toward a horizon filled with color and possibility. It wasn't a sad painting, or an angry one. It was hopeful. People responded to that painting more than any other I had done. Several viewers told me it made them cry. One woman said it perfectly captured her own experience of leaving a marriage that had stopped nurturing her. Another said it reminded her of moving across the country to pursue dreams she had set aside during her child-rearing years. I realized I was painting not just my own story, but a universal one. The story of women who reach a certain age and realize they have become invisible in their own lives. The story of people who love so much they forget to love themselves. The story of transformation that's possible even in the final third of life. The art sales helped my finances, but more importantly, they helped my self-esteem. I was contributing something valuable to the world again. Not just care and service and financial support, but beauty and meaning and emotional connection. My walking group friends started bringing their adult children to see my work when they visited. Several of these children commissioned pieces from me. One asked me to paint a portrait of her late mother based on a photograph. Another wanted a painting of the house where she had grown up. I was developing a reputation as an artist who understood love and loss and the complex relationships between generations. My work had emotional resonance because it came from emotional truth. Around this time, Lisa called. We hadn't spoken in nearly 8 months. "Mom, we need to talk." My stomach twisted with the old familiar anxiety, but I took a breath and reminded myself that I was no longer the same woman who had waited desperately for her children's approval. "What would you like to discuss?" "Your behavior, this whole reinvention phase you're going through. People are talking." "What people?" "Neighbors, friends, Emma. Everyone's commenting on how different you are." "Different how?" "Selfish. Irresponsible. You're spending money on frivolous things while your family struggles." The old accusations, delivered with the old authority. But they bounced off me like water off glass. "Lisa, I'm spending my money on things that bring me joy and fulfillment. That's not selfish. That's healthy." "You bought a painting supplies instead of helping Michael with his rent." "That's correct. Michael is a grown man with his own responsibilities. My money is my money to spend as I choose." "I can't believe how cold you've become." Cold. Another weapon word, designed to make me question my own instincts and priorities. "I'm not cold, Lisa. I'm boundaried. There's a difference." "Emma says you're dating someone." "I'm seeing several people socially. Again, that's my choice to make. Don't you think you're a little old for that?" And there it was, the belief that women my age should fade quietly into the background, making ourselves available for family needs but not pursuing our own happiness or fulfillment or romantic connection. No, I don't think I'm too old for companionship. I think I'm exactly old enough to know what I want and young enough to pursue it. The conversation continued for another few minutes, but the tone had been established. Lisa was disappointed that I had stopped being the infinitely available, self-sacrificing mother she had grown comfortable taking for granted. I was disappointed that she couldn't be happy about my newfound joy and independence. We ended the call cordially but without warmth. I felt sad about the distance between us, but I didn't feel guilty about the choices that had created that distance. For the first time in my life, I was prioritizing my own well-being, and I wasn't going to apologize for that. Fall arrived with gorgeous colors that inspired a new series of paintings. I was working on a piece depicting a woman dancing alone in a field of autumn leaves when my phone rang. Emma's name on the caller ID. Hi, sweetheart. Grandma, I wanted to call you before you heard from anyone else. My heart stopped. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. Something wonderful, actually. I'm getting married. Married. At 19. My immediate instinct was to object, to warn, to list all the reasons this was premature. But I caught myself. Tell me about him. His name is David. He's 21, a junior at my college. We've been dating for 8 months. I know it's fast, but we love each other, and we want to start our lives together. When? December. A small ceremony, just family and close friends. Are you happy? So happy, Grandma. I can't wait for you to meet him. Actually, that's why I'm calling. I want to bring him to meet you next weekend, if that's okay. Of course it's okay. I would love to meet him. Mom and Dad don't know yet. You're the first person I've told. The significance of this wasn't lost on me. Despite the distance that had grown between me and her parents, Emma still considered me important enough to share her biggest news with first. Thank you for trusting me with this, sweetheart. I'm honored. That weekend, Emma arrived with David, a tall, serious young man studying engineering. He held doors for Emma, listened when she spoke, and asked thoughtful questions about my paintings. Most importantly, he looked at Emma the way Robert used to look at me, like she was the most fascinating person in the world. I liked him immediately. Over dinner, they told me about their plans. A simple wedding, probably at a church near campus. Honeymoon camping trip because they didn't have much money. David would finish college while Emma started her career. They wanted children someday, but not immediately. They were young, but they weren't foolish. They had discussed finances, career goals, where they wanted to live. They were approaching marriage as a partnership rather than a fairy tale. What do you think, Grandma? Emma asked. Are we crazy? I think you're young. I think marriage is hard work. I think if you're both willing to do that work, age matters less than commitment. David reached across the table and took my hand. Thank you for not lecturing us about being too young. Emma was worried you might react like her parents will. How do you think they'll react? Emma's face clouded. Dad will be angry that I'm not finishing college first. Mom will say I'm throwing my life away. They'll probably blame you somehow. Blame me? For what? For being supportive. They think you encourage my independence too much. Another puzzle piece clicked into place. My children didn't just object to my newfound boundaries with them. They objected to my relationship with Emma that existed independent of their control. They wanted me to reinforce their authority rather than supporting Emma's autonomy. But Emma was 19 years old, legally an adult, capable of making her own choices, even if those choices carried risks. My job was to love her through those choices, not to prevent her from making them. I'll support whatever decision you make, I told her. And I'll be there for your wedding if you want me there. Of course we want you there. You're walking me down the aisle. Walking her down the aisle, the role traditionally reserved for fathers, but Emma was choosing me. I was overcome with emotion. It would be my honor. After they left, I sat in my apartment thinking about legacy and generations. Emma was choosing to confide in me not because I had spent decades being available for her family's every need, but because I had recently become someone whose company she genuinely enjoyed, someone whose opinion she valued, someone she trusted to support her choices rather than judge them. I had become the grandmother I wished I'd had at her age, someone who believed in my potential rather than lecturing about my limitations. The next morning, Lisa called. Emma told us about the engagement. Her voice was tight with anger. Yes, she's very happy. She's 19 years old, Mom. She's barely an adult. She seems very mature to me. Because you encouraged this, she said you gave them your blessing. I told them I would support their decision. Do you have any idea what you've done? She's going to drop out of college. She's going to waste her potential. And you just smiled and nodded like this was wonderful news. Lisa, Emma is going to make her own choices whether we approve of them or not. My choice is whether to maintain a loving relationship with her while she makes those choices, or to damage our relationship by trying to control choices that aren't mine to make. She looks up to you. If you had expressed concerns, she might have listened. She might have. She also might have decided I was just another adult who didn't believe in her judgment. I preferred to err on the side of trust. Trust. You call it trust when a 19-year-old makes a life-altering decision based on 8 months of dating? I call it trust when I believe Emma is capable of learning from her experiences, even if some of those experiences turn out to be mistakes. The conversation escalated from there. Lisa accused me of undermining her parenting. I pointed out that Emma was no longer a child to be parented. She accused me of trying to buy Emma's affection by always being supportive. I explained that support and approval weren't the same thing. Eventually, Lisa delivered her ultimatum. If you participate in this wedding, don't expect to remain part of this family. The silence stretched between us. This was the moment I had been dreading and preparing for simultaneously. The moment when I had to choose between my relationship with Emma and my relationship with her parents. Lisa, I love you. I will always love you. But I'm going to walk Emma down the aisle at her wedding, and I'm going to celebrate this milestone in her life because she asked me to, and because I believe she deserves family support during important moments. Then you've made your choice. Yes, I have. And I hung up. The finality of it was devastating and liberating simultaneously. I had lost my daughter, probably permanently, but I had kept my integrity and my relationship with my granddaughter. I spent the next several days crying, grieving, and questioning my decision. But when I imagined Emma's wedding day without me there, when I pictured her walking down the aisle alone because her parents had bullied me into abandoning her, I knew I had made the right choice. Emma called a few days later, crying. "Grandma, I'm so sorry. I never wanted to cause problems between you and Mom." "Sweetheart, you didn't cause these problems. These problems existed long before your engagement. Your wedding just brought them to the surface. Maybe David and I should wait. Maybe we should postpone until everyone can be happy about it. Emma, listen to me carefully. You cannot live your life waiting for other people to approve of your choices. You cannot postpone your happiness until everyone else is comfortable with it. If you and David are ready for marriage, get married. If you're not, don't. But make that decision based on what's right for you, not on what's convenient for other people." "But I don't want to split up the family." "The family split up years ago, sweetheart. We just pretended it hadn't. Now we're all being forced to acknowledge what was already true." "Will you really walk me down the aisle?" Nothing would make me prouder. Planning Emma's wedding became my focus for the next several months. Since her parents weren't participating, she needed extra support with decisions about flowers, music, photography, and all the details that make a wedding memorable. I contributed financially, but more importantly, I contributed emotionally. I listened to her worries about managing school and marriage simultaneously. I assured her that David's nervousness was normal. I helped her choose a dress that made her feel beautiful rather than one that satisfied someone else's expectations. The wedding was small and lovely. David's family welcomed Emma warmly and treated me with respect and appreciation. Emma looked radiant, confident, absolutely certain of her choice. David looked terrified and thrilled, which I remembered as exactly how Robert had looked at our wedding. Walking Emma down the aisle was one of the most profound experiences of my life. I was representing not just myself, but all the generations of women who had loved her. I was passing her from one phase of life to another, from our family to her new family, with blessing and confidence and hope. During the reception, several people commented on how much Emma and I looked alike, how obvious it was that we were family. One of David's aunts asked how I had raised such a confident, independent young woman. "I didn't raise her," I explained. but I tried to love her in a way that made her feel capable of anything. That night, alone in my apartment, I looked at wedding photos on my phone and thought about dreams fulfilled in unexpected ways. I had always imagined being surrounded by grateful children and grandchildren in my golden years. Instead, I was building a life that felt fulfilling regardless of their participation. I had learned to find joy in my own accomplishments rather than in their approval. I had developed relationships based on mutual respect rather than family obligation. I had discovered parts of myself that had nothing to do with my role as mother and grandmother. Winter arrived early that year, and with it came a phone call from Michael. "Mom, we need to talk." "About what?" "About this situation with Lisa and Emma's wedding. About the way you've been acting lately." "I'm listening." "Do you realize you've split up this family? Do you understand what your selfishness has cost all of us?" The old accusations again. Selfishness. Splitting up the family, as if I had been the one to issue ultimatums and create divisions. "Michael, I participated in my granddaughter's wedding because she asked me to. Lisa chose to end our relationship because I wouldn't let her control my decisions. I didn't split up anything. I simply stopped allowing other people to make my choices for me." Emma could have waited. She could have had the wedding when everyone could be happy about it. When would that have been? What conditions would have needed to be met for Lisa to approve of Emma's choices? Lisa just wanted Emma to finish college first. Lisa wanted Emma to postpone her happiness until Lisa felt comfortable with it. That's not reasonable. You always take Emma's side. I take Emma's side when I believe she's making reasonable choices. I would take your side or Lisa's side under the same circumstances. No, you wouldn't. You've changed, Mom. You used to care about keeping this family together. I cared about keeping this family together so much that I made myself invisible in it. I gave so much that I disappeared. That's not healthy for anyone. The conversation continued along familiar lines. I was accused of selfishness, manipulation, changes for the worse. I was blamed for family conflicts that predated my recent independence by years. But this time, I didn't feel defensive or guilty. I felt sad that Michael couldn't see how much healthier our family dynamics could be if everyone took responsibility for their own happiness, instead of expecting me to manage everyone else's emotions. Michael, I love you. I will always love you. But I'm not going to return to being someone who exists solely to serve other people's needs. If you want a relationship with me, it will have to be based on mutual respect and genuine affection, not on what I can provide for you. Fine, have it your way. But don't expect me to come running when you're old and sick and need help. And there it was. The threat I had been fearing for years. The possibility that my independence would cost me care and support in my declining years. Michael, I hope I never need to depend on my children for basic care. I'm planning and saving and preparing so that I can maintain my independence as long as possible. But if the time comes when I do need help, I hope you'll provide it because you love me, not because you feel obligated. And I hope you'll provide it with kindness, not resentment. We'll see. He hung up. I sat holding the phone, processing what had just happened. Both of my children had now officially ended their relationships with me rather than accept my recent boundaries and independence. I was effectively estranged from the family I had spent decades serving. It should have been devastating, and it was sad. But it wasn't devastating in the way I had expected, because I wasn't the same woman who had spent Christmas morning alone reading that "do not eat" message from Emma. I had built a life worth living independent of their approval. I had friends who enjoyed my company. I had artistic work that brought me fulfillment and income. I had a relationship with Emma that existed separate from her parents' drama. I had romantic companionship with Harold that was based on mutual respect and genuine affection. I was no longer afraid of being alone because I was no longer lonely when I was alone. Spring came early that year, and with it came news that Emma was pregnant. She called me first again, excited and nervous. "Grandma, David and I are having a baby." "Congratulations, sweetheart. How are you feeling? Tired, nauseous, happy, scared, all at the same time?" "That sounds exactly right. We haven't told my parents yet. I don't know how they'll react." "How do you want them to react?" "I want them to be happy for us. I want them to be excited about becoming grandparents. But I'm afraid they'll just be disappointed that we got pregnant so soon after getting married." "Emma, you can't control how other people react to your life. You can only control how you react to their reactions. If they choose to be disappointed instead of excited, that's their loss." "Will you be excited?" "I'm already excited. I can't wait to meet this baby." Emma was about 4 months pregnant when Lisa called me. "I suppose you've heard Emma's latest news." "I have. I'm very happy for her." "Happy?" "She's 20 years old, married less than a year, still in college. This is a disaster." "This is a baby, Lisa. Your grandchild. How is that a disaster?" "Because she's throwing her life away. She'll never finish school now. She'll spend her 20s changing diapers instead of building a career. She'll spend her 20s doing what millions of women have done successfully, balancing motherhood with other goals. It's challenging, but it's not impossible." "And you'll support this too, I suppose. You'll encourage another bad decision." "I'll support Emma through whatever decision she makes. That's what people who love her should do." "You're not helping her by enabling her mistakes." "I'm not enabling anything. I'm loving her unconditionally while she builds the life she wants to live. There's a difference." The conversation ended with Lisa hanging up on me, but not before informing me that I shouldn't expect to be involved in this grandchild's life if I continued undermining her parenting. More threats, more ultimatums, more attempts to control my relationship with Emma by threatening to restrict my access to her children. But Emma was an adult now. She could make her own decisions about who she wanted in her life and her children's lives. Lisa's threats were empty. Emma's baby was born on a snowy February morning, a little girl named Grace, after my middle name. Emma had asked if she could use it, and I was deeply honored. I was at the hospital within hours of Grace's birth, one of the first people to hold her. She was perfect, tiny pink fingers, dark hair, eyes that seemed to look directly at me with ancient wisdom. "She looks like you, Grandma," Emma said softly. "Same nose, same chin." Looking down at Grace, I saw past and future colliding. I saw the grandmother I had been to Emma, devoted, protective, unconditionally loving. I saw the great-grandmother I wanted to be to Grace, present but not intrusive, supportive but not controlling, loving but not possessive. I had learned so much about love in the past few years. Real love, I now understood, meant wanting the best for someone even when their version of best didn't match your own. It meant offering support without strings attached. It meant celebrating their choices even when those choices carried risks. Grace changed everything for our small family. David's parents became more involved, providing practical and emotional support for the new parents. Harold, who had become a steady presence in my life, was wonderful with the baby, patient and gentle and clearly besotted with her. Emma and David moved into a larger apartment, and I helped them decorate a nursery. We hung some of my paintings on the walls, bright, cheerful pieces that would stimulate a baby's developing vision and remind Grace, as she grew older, that her great-grandmother was an artist. I babysat regularly, but never presumed. Emma always asked rather than assuming I was available. David always thanked me rather than taking my help for granted. They treated my time and energy as gifts rather than expectations. It was a completely different dynamic than I had experienced with my own children. Emma and David appreciated help, but didn't depend on it entirely. They made their own decisions and took responsibility for the consequences. They included me when they wanted company and respected my time when I had other commitments. This was what healthy family relationship looked like, I realized. Interdependence rather than dependence. Mutual respect rather than obligation. Love freely given and gratefully received, but never demanded or assumed. Grace was 6 months old when I got another message that would change everything. But this time, it wasn't a warning. It was an opportunity. A gallery owner in Manhattan had seen my work at a community art fair and wanted to discuss representing me professionally. Not just selling a few pieces at local venues, but mounting a real show in a real gallery with professional marketing and serious prices. I was 76 years old and being offered my first professional art exhibition. The meeting was surreal. The gallery was elegant, with white walls and perfect lighting and price tags that made me dizzy. The owner, Maria, was younger than my children, but treated me with respect and enthusiasm. "Your work has such emotional authenticity," she explained. "There's a story in every piece, and your technique has real sophistication, especially considering you've been painting seriously for less than 3 years." We discussed themes, timelines, marketing strategies. She wanted to focus on my late-life Renaissance story, grandmother who discovered her artistic voice after decades of putting others first, woman who reclaimed her identity in her 70s. It was exactly my story, but hearing it described as marketable and inspiring was shocking. I had been living it as personal growth. She saw it as universal inspiration. The exhibition was scheduled for the following spring. I had 6 months to create a cohesive body of work that told the story of my transformation from invisible caregiver to independent artist. I threw myself into painting with energy I hadn't felt in decades. I painted the apartment where I had raised my children, but I painted it as seen from outside the window by someone walking away. I painted hands giving and giving until they were empty. I painted a woman dancing alone, arms raised to the sky, face turned toward sunlight. I painted my family as I had experienced them, beautiful but distant figures standing in warm light while I remained in shadows. I painted them as I saw them now, people living their own lives while I lived mine, connected by love but not by obligation. The paintings were honest in a way that frightened me sometimes. They revealed years of pain and disappointment, but they also revealed healing and growth and joy. They told the story of a woman who had learned her own worth after 7 decades of defining herself through other people's needs. Harold came with me to hang the paintings the day before the exhibition opening. Standing in the gallery surrounded by my work, I felt a sense of accomplishment I had never experienced before. This was mine. I had created this beauty. I had transformed my pain into something meaningful and valuable. "You should be proud," Harold said, squeezing my hand. "I am proud. For the first time in my life, I'm genuinely proud of what I've accomplished." The opening reception was better attended than I had dared to hope. Friends from my walking group, book club, and art classes. Neighbors from my building. Emma and David, with Grace in a stroller, beaming with pride. Harold in his best suit, playing the part of devoted companion perfectly. Several pieces sold that first night. People approached me throughout the evening to share their own stories of late-life transformation, family conflict, and personal rediscovery. My paintings had touched something universal, just as Maria had predicted. The most meaningful moment came when Emma found me near the end of the evening. "Grandma, I'm so proud of you. When I grow up, I want to be brave like you." "You already are brave, sweetheart. You've been making your own choices and living your own life since you were 19. That takes tremendous courage. I learned it from you, watching you become who you really are these past few years. It taught me that I could become who I really am, too." Standing in the gallery surrounded by my paintings, holding my great-granddaughter while my granddaughter praised my courage, I felt complete in a way I never had before. Not because I had everyone's approval, but because I had my own. The exhibition ran for 6 weeks and was considered a success. Several major pieces sold, and I received commissions for custom work. Art critics wrote positive reviews that mentioned my unflinching honesty and transformation of personal pain into universal beauty. But the most important outcome wasn't financial or professional. It was personal. I had proven to myself that it was never too late to become who you were meant to be. That decades of self-sacrifice didn't have to define the rest of your life. That independence and love weren't mutually exclusive. 6 months after the exhibition closed, I got a phone call I wasn't expecting. "Mom?" Lisa's voice was tentative, uncertain. "Hello, Lisa. I've been thinking about calling for weeks. I saw the article about your art show in the local paper. It was a wonderful experience. I looked up the gallery online. Your paintings they're beautiful and honest. Thank you. I think I understand some things now that I didn't understand before, about why you changed, about what you needed from us that we weren't giving you." I waited, not trusting my voice. I saw the painting called Invisible Woman, the one of the mother figure fading into the background while the family lives their lives in bright colors. And I realized, that's how we made you feel, isn't it? Sometimes, yes. I'm sorry, Mom. I'm sorry we took you for granted. I'm sorry we expected you to always be available without ever considering what you needed from us. The apology I had dreamed of for years wasn't as satisfying as I had expected it to be, partly because it came too late, after I had already learned to live without it, partly because I no longer needed it to feel worthy. I appreciate you saying that, Lisa. I'd like to see you, to meet Grace, to try to rebuild some kind of relationship if you're willing. I'd like that too. We met at a neutral location, a cafe in Brooklyn Heights with a view of the harbor. Lisa looked older, tireder than when I had last seen her. Motherhood and career and the stress of family conflict had aged her. Grace was walking now, chattering in baby language, curious about everything. Lisa was clearly smitten with her granddaughter, patient and playful in ways I remembered from when she was a young mother herself. "She's beautiful," Lisa said, watching Grace toddle around the cafe collecting smiles from strangers. "Emma seems like she's handling motherhood well. She's a natural. David is very supportive. They're a good team. I've missed so much. First steps, first words. I don't even know what she likes to eat or what games she plays. It's not too late to learn." We talked for 2 hours. Lisa asked about my art, my social life, my relationship with Harold. She seemed genuinely interested in my answers, not just making conversation. She told me about her work stress, her marriage problems, her worries about aging parents and growing children. For the first time in years, we talked like two adults sharing their lives rather than like a parent and child negotiating obligations. When it was time to leave, Lisa hesitated. "Mom, I know I don't have the right to ask this, but would you be willing to have a relationship with Michael and me again? Even if it's different than it used to be? Even if it takes time to rebuild trust?" I looked at my daughter, really looked at her. She was 53 years old, dealing with her own challenges and disappointments. She had made mistakes in how she treated me, but she was acknowledging those mistakes and asking for a chance to do better. "I'm willing to try," I said carefully, "but it has to be different. I won't go back to being the invisible woman who exists solely to serve everyone else's needs. I have my own life now, my own priorities, my own boundaries." I understand, and I respect that. Actually, I admire it. I think I need to learn some of the same lessons you've learned about self-worth and independence. It wasn't a magical reconciliation. Trust, once broken, takes time and consistent behavior to rebuild. But it was a beginning. Over the following months, Lisa and I established a new relationship based on mutual respect rather than family obligation. She called when she wanted to talk, not just when she needed something. She asked about my plans before making requests for my time. She showed genuine interest in my artwork and social life. Michael took longer to come around, and when he did, it was with more conditions and less genuine remorse. I accepted his limited overtures, but didn't invest heavily in hoping for dramatic change. Some relationships can be fully repaired, others can only be managed. Emma's second child was born when Grace was 2, a son named Robert, after my late husband. This time, both my children were present for the birth, and while the dynamics were still somewhat awkward, there was genuine celebration and support. I watched my family navigate this new baby's arrival and saw how different things were now. Lisa and Michael didn't assume I would provide unlimited babysitting. Emma and David didn't expect me to prioritize their needs above my own. Everyone asked rather than assumed, thanked rather than took for granted. It wasn't the family dynamic I had originally envisioned, but it was healthier for everyone involved. The children were learning to manage their own responsibilities. I was free to help when I chose to rather than because it was expected. Love was freely given rather than demanded or manipulated. Harold and I married a year later, a simple ceremony in Prospect Park with just family and close friends present. At 78 and 82, we weren't looking for passion or drama. We were looking for companionship and support and someone to share the final chapters of our lives with. Emma walked me down the aisle this time, and Grace scattered flower petals while Robert toddles alongside her. Harold's sons came from California, and my children were gracious and welcoming. It felt like the family celebration I had always wanted, joyful, voluntary, filled with people who genuinely wanted to be there. We honeymooned in Italy, something I had dreamed of for decades but never thought possible. Harold had always wanted to see Renaissance art in person, and I wanted to paint the Tuscan countryside. We spent 2 weeks indulging in beauty and culture and romance, behaving like newlyweds despite our combined age of 160. The trip inspired a new series of paintings, landscapes filled with golden light and ancient architecture. These pieces sold well, and I began to develop an international reputation as a late-blooming artist whose work spoke to themes of renewal and second chances. By the time I turned 80, my life looked nothing like what I had expected at 75. I was married to a wonderful man who respected my independence and supported my ambitions. I had a thriving art career that provided both income and fulfillment. I had rebuilt relationships with my children based on mutual respect rather than exploitation. I had close relationships with my grandchildren and great-grandchildren that brought me joy without overwhelming responsibility. Most importantly, I had learned to value myself, not just for what I could provide for others, but for who I was as an individual. I had discovered that self-respect and self-care weren't selfish. They were necessary foundations for healthy relationships with others. The woman who had received that "do not eat" message on Christmas morning, terrified and desperate for family acceptance, seemed like someone from another lifetime. She had been real, and her pain had been valid, but she had also been trapped by beliefs that kept her small and invisible and constantly seeking approval from people who had grown comfortable taking her for granted. I think about her often, that earlier version of myself. I feel compassion for her struggles and admiration for her eventual courage to change. But I'm grateful I'm no longer her. Last Christmas, Harold and I hosted dinner at our apartment. The same small space, but transformed by plants and paintings and furniture that reflected my actual taste rather than just practicality. Emma and David came with Grace and Robert. Lisa and her husband joined us, along with Michael and Sarah. Harold's sons participated via video call from California. It wasn't a perfect family gathering. There were still awkward moments and unspoken tensions, but there was also genuine warmth and appreciation and celebration. Most importantly, there was respect for everyone's choices and boundaries. As I looked around the table at the faces of people I loved, I realized this was what I had been searching for all along. Not constant contact or endless service or grateful dependency, but authentic connection. Relationships where love was freely given and genuinely received. Family bonds based on choice rather than obligation. The message that had changed everything, "Do not eat," had been meant to protect me from food poisoning. But in a larger sense, it had protected me from something far more toxic, a way of living that was slowly poisoning my sense of self-worth and authentic happiness. Sometimes the warnings that terrify us most are exactly what we need to hear. Sometimes the crises that shatter our illusions are necessary to clear space for better realities. Sometimes the relationships that seem to be ending are actually transforming into something healthier and more sustainable. I'm 83 now, and I know my time is limited. But I'm not afraid of aging or death the way I used to be, because I'm no longer afraid of being forgotten or unloved. I've built a life that has meaning independent of other people's approval. I've created art that will outlast me. I've touched lives in positive ways. I've learned how to love others without losing myself in the process. The woman who was invisible has become visible. The woman who was taken for granted has learned to value herself. The woman who was afraid to say no has discovered the power and peace that comes from healthy boundaries. If you're listening to this and recognizing parts of your own story, I want you to know, it's never too late. Whatever age you are, whatever relationships have disappointed you, whatever dreams you've set aside, it's never too late to reclaim your life and your worth. You don't have to accept being invisible. You don't have to buy love with constant service. You don't have to sacrifice your identity to maintain relationships that drain you without nourishing you back. You can learn to say no without guilt. You can set boundaries without apology. You can pursue your own happiness without being selfish. You can love deeply while still loving yourself. The transformation isn't easy. It requires courage to disappoint people who have grown comfortable with your self-sacrifice. It requires faith that you're worthy of respect and genuine affection. It requires patience as you rebuild relationships on healthier foundations, or create new relationships that honor who you really are. But the alternative, continuing to live as a shadow of yourself, constantly seeking approval from people who have stopped seeing you clearly, is worse than the temporary discomfort of change. Have you ever felt invisible in your own family? Have you ever questioned whether you're loved for who you are, or just for what you provide? Have you ever wondered what your life might look like if you stopped saying yes to everything and started honoring your own needs and dreams? Tell me your story in the comments. Share your struggles and your victories. Let's remind each other that we're not alone in this journey toward self-respect and authentic happiness. If this story touched your heart, please like this video and subscribe to my channel. Together, we can keep opening our hearts and supporting each other as we learn to love ourselves as fiercely as we've always loved others. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for seeing me. And remember, you are never too old to become who you were always meant to be.